Hi, and welcome to Storytime. It's February, and we are talking about ahimsa. Ahimsa is the theme for this month because ahimsa means compassion, means the practice of doing no harm. However, I wanted to take today's Storytime to talk a little bit deeper about the ways in which we can choose, meaning intentionally practice doing no harm. Because honestly, there's about 4 layers that I've come up with in terms of using the tools of our humanness, our body, our mind, and our breath, to do action of living intentionally. How are you? I'm glad that you're here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity that we have to connect. Whether you're here with me live at 11:30 on Tuesdays, or you're finding this after the fact. I like to believe that the teacher and the student find each other when ready for that connection. As a yoga teacher and a coach, my goal is to meet you where you're at and then help you build the life that you love one step at a time, one breath at a time, by integrating intentional practices into the way in which you show up for real life every day. The first step is to show up, but the only thing that's required is that you breathe. Everything else along the way, those are the options, the choices. And sometimes our choices can feel overwhelming. I get it. So we cultivate this calm, safe space, this practice of living, of showing up. And then through practice, literally by showing up repeatedly, we start to increase our competency and our confidence in doing the practices that help us to cultivate happiness and joy. I call it inspired living, but it really is simply the practice of living yoga beyond the mat. I want to talk today about these interpretations. I call them 4 levels or 4 types of action. You've heard me before, perhaps, in talking about essentially 3 objectives by way of our human experience. We have a body, we have a mind, not just the intellectual, but the emotional and the intuitive as well. But we also have access to breath or prana through our energy that moves through our body. These 3 tools correlate to our ways in which we can engage these tools. Our thoughts are an example of how we can use our mind. Emotions are an example of how our heart speaks. Our energy speaks, or our access to energy might speak through our words, chanting, singing, crying. Our body through movement. But when it comes to the understanding of action, intentional action, there's really 4 nuances that I want to help you understand so that you can choose which level of effort best serves your purpose. Now, it is February, and all month long, I'm talking about ahimsa, or the practice of non-harming. It also has been translated to the practice of intentionally loving. And maybe you can already see that those are 2 sides of the same coin. If my practice to non-harm, right, does that, really truly does not harm, then in that way I'm allowing love to show up in the absence of sorrow or suffering or pain. But what if I want to actually do more than just not harm? Right? Perhaps it means have a neutral impact. Well, I don't know about you, but neutral impact doesn't excite me, doesn't make me feel like my life matters. I want to have a positive impact. I want to inspire. That's one of my personal goals, right? So to do no harm or to simply do neutral isn't enough for me. I want to actively do good, to actively contribute to the sum of love in our world. When we choose to do love, when we choose to embrace our body, mind, and our breath's efforts to live in agreement, to live in a facilitation of love. We have the choice of doing or non-doing. Then we also could be redoing or undoing. So in other words, our action and inaction, doing and non-doing, undoing and redoing. Well, what does that even mean? Well, non-doing means I avoid doing harm, or I avoid doing something that I am certain is going to cause someone else pain. On the flip side, I can do the action of actually contributing to someone's wellness, someone's safety, someone's good feeling by saying something as simple as, I see you, I appreciate you, I love you, right? Words being the tangible form of energy. Maybe an act of kindness. Maybe you present someone with a gift, like a meal that you've made for them, or a love note that you've expressed your gratitude for their contribution, for their existence in your life. But honestly, what if we were to take another level up, to upgrade our intentionality, our power and impact, in the sense that, yes, controlling what we do and don't do, actively choosing to act in service and in love, to avoid those things that might be harmful. This could also mean, right, that we don't do some things as an act of service. This is probably one of the hardest strategies in my life, is that often I am tempted, particularly as a coach, a trainer, and even as a mom, that I want to do the thing that my student or my kid needs. And yet by doing the thing, I rob them of the chance of doing it for themselves. So one of my practices of love is literally the non-doing, as often, perhaps, as the doing. But the next level is about exploring ways in which I can redo, right? So maybe I attempted to show love, but it fell flat. It was poorly executed, right? Because my skill is new, imperfect, in process, right? In which case, I practice, which might mean I actually have to accept responsibility for what was an unintended consequence. I'm sorry, that didn't work. Let me try again. If we are so lucky to be able to try again, we can actually enhance our relationships because of the vulnerability that we express when we say, look, I'm not perfect, but my intention is good. Let me try again. Now, there's another layer in which we can also actively contribute to ahimsa, and that is the undoing and redoing of someone else's actions. In other words, systemic racism or past harms, maybe from our ancestors, maybe not from our ancestors, but just part of our culture. The idea is that when we recognize a disservice, when we recognize an injury or a potential for perpetuating harm, do we take the actions or the non-actions of undoing that systemic perpetuation? Right? There's a lot of talk right now about folks who look like me, fair-skinned, not speaking up to defend our sisters and brothers of darker skin tone, or not actively engaging in denying the systemic racism that exists in our culture. We all have a role to play, and I'm not here to tell you that you need to protest or that you need to rally or that you need to donate money. That's for you to decide the actions that most align with who you are and how you want to live this practice. Now, I've chosen Ahimsa, one, because it's the month of February and the month of love, but also because it is the foundation of all yoga living. The first yama is Ahimsa. So whether you choose to do acts of love, or maybe today the best you can offer is to not do things that might cause harm, or depending on your resources and your level of energy and clarity of intention, you might actually own up to your own failings and apologize for the wrongdoings, whether they were intentional, ill-advised, or completely unintentional. And lastly, probably for me, the most challenging is to show up in a way that I can help to undo the wrongs that were not my fault, not even really my responsibility. But here's where responsibility gets kind of sticky, is that by knowing that it exists, and by being a person who wants to live in alignment, that now knowing compels me to action, to bring my understanding of the world into greater alignment with what I believe is the truth. The second practice of yoga, ahimsa and then satya. Now, we all have our own path, and all paths, if they are based in this practice of living well, will cultivate an intimate relationship with inspiration. But for me, that intimacy begins with ahimsa through acts of action, of inaction, of doing and non-doing, of redoing and undoing. I'm not perfect by any means, and I have made plenty of mistakes. And to be honest, I predict that I will continue to make mistakes. But I'm showing up. And that's my invitation to you as well. Show up in your practice. Show up for the people who are in relationship with you. Own your stories. Own your perceptions and speak your truths, what you know, what you don't know. And practice being compassionate. Practice being a conduit of love. Even if, because the chances are good, your practice is going to take some effort to cultivate a discipline and a suppleness, the ease of getting better at doing the things that are hard, right? Life is kind of hard, especially if you're choosing to live authentically, which is going to mean that you're going to live in a little bit of vulnerability. You can't have one without the other. But the purpose of living in alignment is to help us show up so that we can authentically risk our hearts to love each other, to be vulnerable in the process of living our human lives together in authentic connection. I love to hear your stories of doing love, of being in relationship when it's challenging and when it's blissful and easeful. It's by sharing our stories that we can inspire each other and open our eyes to see new possibilities of ways in which to be in the world. Whether you choose to do in active ways of the body, the breath, or through your thoughts and your mind, your heart and your intuition. My invitation for you today is to find a way to express the love that is inherent and share it with those with whom you choose to share this world. Be well. May you breathe deeply, move freely, labor lovingly, and live vibrantly. I'll see you soon. Take care.